Hello, everyone. Welcome to Shelf Space with Kino Lorber, where we talk about all things film, filmmaking, and physical media. We have a very special episode today. I'm here with Kino Lorber's head of special restorations, Bret Wood, and musician, composer, producer, writer, all the things, Paul Miller, aka DJ Spooky. Today, we're going to be talking about silent films, the art of scoring and restoring them, and some special projects that Bret and Paul have worked on together. Hey, Paul. Hey, Bret. How are you?
I am good.
Doing very well. Nice to see you again, Alicia.
Yeah, great to see you guys. So you've both worked on this very, very special project together, the Pioneers of African American Cinema Collection, which features works by America's first African American filmmakers like Oscar Micheaux, Zora Neale Hurston, Spencer Williams. And it's actually the 10-year anniversary of the box set this year. Can you talk about how you collaborated and worked together on this incredible project?
Brett, you want to go first?
I'll start first.
Yeah.
Uh, this was our. It was. We knew it was going to be a big undertaking, and I'd forgotten about this until just recently. But it kind of all began with a Kickstarter campaign. This is when Kickstarter was like the big thing and was making it possible for people to make films. And so someone from Kickstarter contacted us about developing like a film restoration initiative. And we felt like, well, what's something that is such a big undertaking that we'll need a little help with the lift because it would be very expensive. You know, we could potentially generate a lot of money from this to undertake a big project. And really quickly, early Black filmmakers was like something we wanted to do. And it was a matter of figuring out how to go about it. And then Paul became, I can't remember how we first connected, Paul, but you sort of were there at the very beginning, and even we interviewed you for the Kickstarter campaign, and you were kind of like the champion and the spokesperson for the release. And eventually we got Charles Musser and Jacqueline Stewart to be our curators, but Paul was kind of like the voice of the collection.
Yeah. We met because there was a kind of a series of emails back and forth about soundtracks and history and film. And so these are all things that I'm very interested in. And the funny thing about DJ culture, and especially electronic music, is that it goes with this idea of the cinematic presentation of things. So when you hear a small sample or vocal clip in an instrumental song, or if you hear a collage version of James Brown mashed up with, I don't know, Philip Glass or something, there's always a kind of a cinematic sensibility with sampling and DJ culture. So, I've always been very interested in silent film, and we just began the conversation and went from there.
Yeah.
Was that the first time you scored silent film, or had you done, silent film scoring before that as well?
I have been doing a series of initiatives around silent film for a while, most notoriously with scoring and re-editing Birth of a Nation by D.W. Griffith. And so I think the Griffith connection and the controversy from that was what led to the beginning of the conversation about the pioneers of African American cinema from my perspective. And eerily enough, because D.W. Griffith's film was so toxic and the legacy of cinema is so fraught with paradoxes of identity, access to materials, technology, and above all, the way that people can raise money. Amusing enough, if you look at Oscar Micheaux, um, he raised money kind of how we do now, like by subscription. And so, amusingly enough, he had a kind of a African American network of investors who just would subscribe to his production studio. So I was always very interested in that, the historical connection between the digital and the analog. Also, I write books about art and technology. So, there was plenty of room for a good conversation.
Well, one thing I'll mention is that Paul, when I first met you, you were touring with Terra Nova, your piece about Antarctica.
Mhm.
And that made me realize you, and also at the time when we first met you, you showed me this app I could download. It was like a DJ app that you were working on. So
Mhm.
technology has always been kind of at the core of, of your interest in media. And it seems to me at least like silent film was just like an opportunity for you to like almost have a blank canvas because here is the film but with no sound and you know an opportunity to fill that in.
Yeah, I mean, Eerily enough, Brett, going to the heart of what you're thinking about, I think Brett is an archival kind of wizard. And so whenever we begin a conversation about this, Brett kind of begins connecting dots with all these incredible films that he has just kind of on tap, memory wise. And it's as a DJ who I collect records, and probably much in the way that Brett probably collects old films, and Alicia, you're engaged with Kino as we're dealing with kind of archival, the kind of archival fever. And Birth of a Nation, eerily enough, pioneered quite a bit of innovation with editing, and the score was based on Wagner. But my Terra Nova project is basically I took a studio to Antarctica and went to several of the main ice fields, all of which have melted, by the way, now. It's, the tragedy of our time. So, from my perspective, DJing is one component, but there's also an archival sensibility and being able to really think about the long history of sound and its relationship to multimedia. So, Terra Nova, it was incredible. I mean, as an African American going to one of the coldest places on earth, it's kind of funny. There's a lot of hip hop singers that say, "Oh, I'm Ice Cube, Ice T, Vanilla Ice. We got the white guy or whatever." And it's kind of hilarious because the way Ice has a kind of relationship to hip hop,
It's
kind of
interesting, Ice
ended up.
Spice.
Yeah, there's a lot of metaphors for Ice from the '90s, 2000, early 2000s, and, even the gold teeth are called Ice Grill. I'm sure
Mm.
in New Orleans, you'll see people with total crazy teeth. Um, but going to Antarctica with a laptop studio was incredible, and that made me just realize the power of innovation with, and how powerful the smaller computers were getting. So, when me and Brett have worked together, I went to Library of Congress, I looked at, the, restoration of the prints, really tried to get into an archival sensibility and learn, not only how the composers would have recorded then, like with an orchestra, or think about all the instrumentation of those earlier films, but how electronic music inherits both the multimedia aspect, the editing aspect, and the archiving. Because I'm always looking for new records, and you'll if I'm in a small town in the middle of nowhere. First thing I did when I got here was go to some of the regional record stores just to see. Once you leave New York, everything's a lot cheaper. I'll leave it at that. Vinyl's gotten crazy
Oh,
expensive. Yeah.
that's very interesting because in a lot of ways, even if you're remixing archival material, you're kind of you're continuing the storytelling there. It's an evolution of that the original archival piece. So, which I
Well,
think,
and, how you present it, whether it's visually changing it or providing audio, is, recontextualizing it and hopefully
yeah.
bringing it to an audience, and helping people discover it who might not otherwise be aware of it. Um, and, uh, any I've what I that's one of the things I always try to do in film restoration work is to take films that are otherwise not gonna be seen, but use either a new score or a new Blu-ray release as the chance to kind of get that film on the cultural radar.
And Brett, to triangulate between what you were saying and what Alicia's saying is that the technology is always changing. What people kind of approach whatever historical film with a contemporary soundtrack, it's kind of a fun paradox because you might see like a really intense piano score. Early silent film was always a lot of times piano driven. Like if the character's running, there's like dun, 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 or something, and the body language has to tell the story of the action. So usually there's a lot more exaggeration of body language in early film, but with electronic music, I would program and think about how would I update that and try and come up with a different sensibility. And it's been an amazing journey because I guess I've known Brett now for a while, and I always keep track of Kino because you guys are pretty deep in the mix in terms of archival material. And DJ culture is evolving rapidly. I mean, now everything is online, everything's hyper digital, streaming, et cetera. And it's kind of like, how would you think about silent film in the 21st century without that mirror of the past to really be able to understand the evolution of both the technology, the editing? And that's where I think these films are incredibly important.
Paul,
Well,
do you
here's the
have
thing
an
I want
overall? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Brett.
well, I was, just wanna, mention, Paul, that, I think a lot of people don't realize the degree to which your scores, even though you are a DJ and work in the digital realm, are very much acoustic, organic, recording sessions, and I think the great thing about this interview is we're gonna be able to play some clips from some of the films you scored so that people see that, uh, uh, you're kind of redefining what a DJ can be. The fact that you're working with silent film in itself is kind of, breaking new ground, I think.
Yeah, shout
100%. I mean, yep. Sorry, go ahead, Alicia.
no, go ahead. I wanted to talk about the specific clips, but
Oh,
please go
yeah.
ahead, Paul.
Let's please have at it.
So you worked on the scores for 2 Oscar Maestro films, Within Our Gates and Body and Soul. And yeah, let's play some clips from both of those, and then we could talk about that. That was incredible. I mean, Paul, what goes into scoring silent films? Do you have an overall process and vision of how you approach a silent film when you begin scoring?
Yeah, I mean, one of my biggest heroes was Melvin Van Peebles, and he did this film, Sweetback's Badass Song, in the 70s, but his house band was Earth, Wind, and Fire. And he helped coin the term black, kind of blaxploitation. Well, he didn't coin it, but his films always explored a very edgy approach to thinking about identity and sound. So he had a in-house funk band, which became this huge, Earth, Wind, and Fire is legendary, but they started in his garage as playing sound when he was having these kind of slapstick actors going. So that always impressed me. And he became a friend of mine. Well, sometimes I've been thinking over the years, people work with the resources at hand. So if you were a filmmaker in the 70s, you'd have Roger Corman, or you'd have all these kinds of like filmmakers that had very, very lean resources. And if you fast forward a little bit, you have Werner Herzog, who's also a huge hero of mine. And my model for these initiatives is kind of director as DJ. And the notion is that sampling and collage and editing are how you put together any story in the age of media. So when you're looking at the last century plus of film, the soundtrack helps tell the story without question. But sometimes if you go just a hair bit earlier, there's composers like Wagner. And Wagner, if you look at Star Wars, if you look at Birth of a Nation, so many, he coined the term Gesamtkunstwerk, which in German means total artwork. And let me know if I'm geeking out here, but for film soundtrack purposes,
You can't get
hey,
enough on this show, Paul.
yeah.
That's the whole point.
Um, but 19th century Wagner really championed this idea of multidimensional opera. And so I always think of the films that Kino Lorber is dealing with as kind of right at the cusp of that 19th to 20th century transition from dimensionality of the opera to the two-dimensional projection of of the screen. And so the films box sets that you guys are dealing with, there's pioneers of women in cinema, there's pioneers of African American cinema, but DJing is still kind of telling story with collage. You're editing, you're taking old records, but I also work with bands and then I'll sample those bands. So it just depends on the project, but each time I've done stuff, I usually have one foot in the world of sampling and then one foot in the world of live scoring. And I'm hugely influenced by people like Hans Zimmer and his scores. For example, I love what he did with Dune recently, which was an incredible score. But I'm also a big fan of earlier, kind of funk stuff like what Earth, Wind, and Fire was doing with Melvin Van Peebles, stuff like that. It's a very eclectic world right now. Like you just think of everything as like constant access to every film or every record ever made. Which who lives like that? But that's the way we are. I mean, it's you can study and figure and create pretty much any style at this point, which is amazing.
I love how wide your range of influences are that you pull from and the references because it just kind of like the sky's the limit, you know? Yeah, I love that. Uh, I actually wanted to talk about, do you have your approach, for a film like an Oscar Michaud film, is that any different from how you approached Rebirth of a Nation, which you essentially deconstructed and then reconstructed in this brilliant way to turn it, from, yes, it was a landmark film for technical reasons. It was also
Right.
the most racist film ever made, but you turn that into
Yeah.
commentary, like a very brilliant critique on race in America. Was your approach for that different?
Well, it's eerie because as this new administration kicks in, we're seeing like, just this wildly xenophobic, wildly ignorant. Birth of a Nation was one of those films that really set the tone for modern cinema at every level. The editing was incredible, the music scoring was incredible, but the message was incredibly hyper toxic. And eerily enough, a lot of early DJs would call themselves Grandmaster Flash or Grand Wizard Theodore. And those are also clan titles. If you have a Grandmaster or Grand Wizard, those are, if you're in the Bronx, it's one thing, but if you're in Kentucky and you're somebody named Grand Wizard, you might. Um, so the film kind of struck me as this eerie paradox of how, um, the Wagnerian sensibility, because the whole score is basically Wagner's Ring Cycle, which is a legendary opera. And so Flight of the Valkyries is in the original, but made into like a silent film thing. Flight of the Valkyries becomes Ride of the Klansman if you actually look at the first score. So you hear, if anybody knows about classical music and hears that, it's like, oh my God, it's Wagner. Dun, 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 dun. And so that riff right there is a DJ. Like as when you're DJing, you take a riff like James Brown or Funkadelic, whatever, you loop it. But that same riff would pop up for the score, for example, to Apocalypse Now. There's this famous scene where they're about to bomb these Vietnamese villages, and the commander puts loudspeakers outside of a helicopter and starts playing Wagner while they start launching. It's a famous scene, but
Yeah.
the director Coppola said he took that from Birth of a Nation, like a riff. So silent film and DJing it's kind of riffs. Like the body language is a riff, the action. It's very much about storytelling, but with condensed ways of getting the audience engaged. And it's wild because Birth of a Nation obviously was hyper racist, and Oscar Michaud responded to that in the making Within Our Gates. So it was again a kind of a DJ battle, so to speak. Like you have one guy over here and the other, and nowadays we just call it a beef, like hip hop beef. Um, there's a great Netflix series called Beef, which is hilarious. If you haven't seen it, anyway, I'd watch a lot of film, so I'm very interested in the first thing I listen to is the score, and then I see how does the score engage the storytelling, and then how does the storytelling supplement the editing, which that's the way we live. Yeah.
So, Rebirth of a Nation was done in collaboration with the Kronos Quartet. How do you work with musicians? Because so much of what you're doing is in your head and is going to be done after you have the raw materials of the score. How do you set the stage for session musicians or the people with whom you're collaborating, knowing that this work is going to probably be processed or changed, you know, as part of your creative process?
Yeah, I mean, It's funny because Birth of a Nation is so toxic, and also don't forget, by the way, there's almost very few black people in the film. It's mostly white people in blackface. So then you have yellowface, which was also a racial stereotypical thing. And eerily enough, whites and blacks were not necessarily allowed to even be in the same stage until you get Paul Robeson, by the way, and we're in the middle of doing a series of initiatives around a film that he did. I'm scoring that, and it's called Borderline, and Paul Robeson also worked with Oscar Micheaux. So there's kind of fun, sort of in technical terms, you say this is hypertextual. Like you have actors that recur. Usually, each director would have a stable of actors they would work with. So when I was working on Birth of a Nation, I looked at the sort of the deep DNA of D.W. Griffith and his relationship to the studio system. He's generally considered to be the first person to think of, like, you have a machine in place, use that machine. I'm not talking about but it's like a factory where you were able to churn out all sorts of film, and that's what Oscar Micheaux did later, but in a black context. Um, so it's kind of an amazing moment because I think as streaming media and digital culture takes over, we're going back in time because there's so much film available that people just lose the sense of history, and they're just like they think this is new or something is new, and then you realize if you go to a Kino Lorber situation, oh, there's a box set of the first women directors. That is incredible. But if you actually just talk at a film school or something, a lot of this stuff is still not as well known as it should be. So that's where I think these are incredibly important to kind of show the legacy of film and how culture has evolved. I mean, it's been a long, crazy journey. The 20th versus 21st century. I mean, I can tell you, Brett, like when you came to see that film Terra Nova, I was able to do that whole project with a backpack, laptop, a couple batteries so that we'd have to charge using solar panels because we were in the middle of nowhere. And I got back and we edited everything. Now I could probably do that whole project on a cell phone with an app, and so on.
Speaking of Borderline, we have a clip from the film. Let's give it a watch. All right, can you guys tell us a little bit about this project that you guys are working on? Or it just came out, right? It's not something in progress. It already released.
Right, has just been released. I knew that Paul was a fan of Paul Robeson. He had done Body and Soul, and so when I had the opportunity to re-release Borderline, it did not have a score at the time. It had been other people had scored it, but when Kino Lorber obtained the master, we had to decide how do we want to position it, and so the movie is very experimental visually. It's been influenced by like the Soviet style of editing. So even though it tells the story of these relationships in this small Swiss town, it's done as if it were some kind of action movie. It's just cut, 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 and again, very fragmentary, but also very rhythmic, visually speaking. And knowing Paul's interest in, not just Paul Robeson, but sort of visually dynamic films, I shared a link and then asked him, like, what would you do with the film? Or what do you think? And he took it from there.
Yeah, I mean, my studio at this point has become very mobile, and I can usually just have like right now I'm talking to you guys on an iPad Pro that has the same chip equivalent of a MacBook Pro, like M4 chip, which is really good at editing. You can bounce sound, you can do everything. And amusingly enough, editing usually is very processor intensive. So when me and Brett do stuff, he'll send me a link. I'll download it to whatever device I'm on at the time or wherever because I move around a lot, except in the last couple months because I bought an old house and I'm in the middle of fixing it up. So when Brett got in touch, he was like, "Hey, we're in the middle of figuring out this Paul Robeson." So I was in a forest a little bit outside of the town, and I checked it out on my phone, and then walked 5 miles back into town because there's a winding country road. And I was listening to bits and pieces of the film and the score while I was walking, and I was like, "Okay, I can figure on this." And I texted Brett when I got home and started making rough drafts on, both my iPad and my laptop and started noodling around. So the process is always very ideational. Like you kind of come up with an idea, you look at the different scenes, and then figure what makes sense. Um, Now, if I had a whole orchestra and was doing everything with a lot of people running around, that's a lot of moving parts. But because I'm very digital based, um, it's allowed me to have a lot more flexibility, and I can try different approaches without having to. It would be very expensive to have full orchestras, all sorts of stuff. But I can usually call a small ensemble to work with me. And the most recent project, I worked with members of the former. It's a legendary band that was called Mahavishnu Orchestra with John McLaughlin. And I was able to work with Primic, who was one of the music arrangers for Mahavishnu Orchestra, which amusing enough, they also played with Miles Davis. And Miles Davis is one of my favorite all-time just, you know, Miles Davis and John Coltrane, they're both like sitting here on my shoulders here. Um, and Miles Davis's film scores are incredible. Like people don't know that his music was put in a lot of film. And same with Terrence Blanchard, who did a lot of the music scores for Spike Lee. So I've always, again, as a DJ, a writer, and artist, it's important to be able to compare notes and see how different styles work. So imagine if you have a heavy metal track to a scene that's set in Switzerland or something, it's not going to work. Or if you have, some sort of music where for a bank robbery, but it sounds like somebody is singing in the shower or something. But basically, you have to make sure that the music matches the scene and then tighten that up. And because I'm able to use software, and I'm editing and recording in a very remote area of New York upstate, to get groceries is about an hour drive.
Wow.
So anything, I'm just happy I have ultra high speed internet and I'm able to kind of upload, download things quickly. And that means, yeah, me and Brett can have a phone call, and within a couple of days or even hours, I can have rough drafts ready and just come together with different concepts. Which that's how we work. Yeah.
Very cool. This is a question for both of you. How do you work together to sort of bring to life, what you think the director's vision would have been without the director there, without the director's input, in terms of music and restoring, like an archival film?
Well, I think in some one of the good things about restoring early film is, and I hope people don't misunderstand this, is you don't have the director to deal with. It gives you total creative freedom. Of course, it would be great to be able to consult a filmmaker or the stars of a film, but we can't. But it really allows you, as either the person restoring the film or scoring the film, to have the creative freedom to, to not be bound by certain constraints, but at the same time, you want to be true to the material. You don't want to, but you also don't want to just mimic what you're seeing on screen. Music wise, I think when we work on scores together, you want the score to be its own living, breathing part of the film, and the last thing you want a score to be is background. You want it to be have a really nice balance with the visuals. Um, so that's kind of and it just comes down to trying to honor the film and trying to do something with the film that will encourage more people to see it, because ultimately that's our objective.
Mhm.
Mhm. And, I mean, to take what Brett said and just kind of like pivot for a moment, A director is someone who's a storyteller. At heart, they want to tell a story. And when they finish a film, they're always trying to figure, how do I dimensionalize this? And so I'll give you a fun example. One of my favorites is Sergei Eisenstein's relationship to Prokofiev, who was a Soviet composer. And so if you ever look at Battleship Potemkin, for example, it's an incredible film and it's incredibly powerful. I mean, it's just people have written whole PhDs just on this one scene where a baby carriage is going down the stairs. I'm sure anybody's ever seen that. It's a famous film scene and it's a famous riff. But the music for Battleship Potemkin really gives you a sense of the tension that's happening with politics, with revolution, with the dissent. Dissent spelled Dissent, by the way, not dissent. But it's an eerie moment because I really think we live in a time where everyone is going to be able to be a producer and a creator, and that's a good thing. AI is leveling the field. A lot of people are like, "Oh my god, AI." I think it's a tool like anything else. But if you're a director, it's kind of like you be able to figure out, how do I dimensionalize this and make the sound work with the images to make it a more robust story? That's kind of it. And so that's where I think a good conversation with someone like Brett, who is both a producer and executive director within the ecosystem at Kino, has been very helpful for me to figure on, okay, here we are, it's 2020, whatever year. I mean, because we've known each other now for a while. Um, I want to throw in like gangster rap? No. If, say, for example, if there's a scene for Eisenstein of rapping over the Battleship Potemkin or something. I mean, it could maybe, but
You should try it. You should try it just to see.
right. And
Like a
it's kind of a funny
composer's cut.
thing. Sorry, go ahead.
Like a composer's cut of the
Right.
version. Anyway,
So,
sorry, go.
but amusing enough, Prokofiev didn't do the score for Potemkin. It was Shostakovich, by the way, who's another Soviet composer. But they end up, if you the films where you can see a Shostakovich score for Eisenstein versus a Prokofiev score, they're very different styles, and it's an incredible um, tension. I mean, the reason I keep bringing up Eisenstein is that we're in the middle of doing some, work thinking about the legacy of his work, and again, DJ culture, sampling, and so on. Um, Ziga Vertov, the Soviets kind of got it because they had collage. If you look at Man with the Camera, which is also another legendary silent film, they were pushing the envelope quite a bit. And I'm just intrigued by that. I always want to learn more and I always want to be able to keep my perspective open to learn more. And that's what makes every score I've done with Kino has been very different.
Is
And I
that
think by
something
introducing kind of a contemporary element, it kind of awakens a person to the to sort of see that the political subtext or the social commentary that someone like Michaud or Eisenstein was making is still relevant. All you have to do is just like update it a little bit. And a lot of times I feel like a score can do that, can make a film seem more contemporary and therefore you watch it in a different way. So
Mhm.
um
In fact, one thing I've always wanted to experiment with, Brad, is like you can have the same film, but different composers do the same music or different music. So you might have one score that's totally like, Philip Glass does Koyaanisqatsi or something, which is a legendary film. Or you might have a score where a different composer comes in and Steve Reich or whatever. And I think that's the beauty of silent film is that you can look at them from multiple perspectives and you really can see a flexibility. And that's where um, modern music for historical film is always a tricky thing. And you can make mistakes, but you should be able to learn from mistakes too. Generally, as a DJ, that means you have to listen to stuff constantly. So I'm very careful when I score films to try and make something that fits the ambiance in a nice, tight, snug manner. Because DJing means you're creating a sonic environment, and that's my motto for these projects is director as DJ. Kind of think, they're making a mix, and you want to kind of look at the mix and see how you can accentuate it.
Well, Paul, I'm glad you brought up different scores for a film because we recently re-released Cabinet of Dr. Caligari with a new score, and I think it now has about 4 scores on the disc, including one that you created for it. A lot of times, we tend to associate your work with Black filmmakers, but you've also done uh, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari with us, and this project which we're discussing and hopefully going to be working on here in just a few weeks ahead is also something that is, uh, you know, in a completely different realm. And yeah, a film can be viewed in as many different ways as there are scores to accompany it. And so that's why some people will say, "Well, why do you keep releasing the same thing?" Well, every time, you have a different score to it, it becomes a different viewing experience.
Mhm.
I think that's so interesting that, like, a score can give it a whole new life and extend the storytelling, finding new things in the storytelling with the music.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's the kind of how should I put this? The legacy of our time is we live in an era of multiplicity. Like
Mhm.
anything that you look at on YouTube, you can easily find. And I'm kind of a huge YouTube fan. During the pandemic, I learned how to cook by watching YouTube videos because I live in downtown Manhattan and there's so many good restaurants. I never learned how to cook. Yeah, literally, if we have a meeting, I'll meet friends at a restaurant or a cafe, and I had a loft, where the kitchen was gathering dust. I mean, I never really, who wants to stay home? And there's so many good restaurants right nearby. So I was like, I don't know how to, so YouTube became kind of my pandemic kind of archival space. And I realized, yeah, there's every possible crazy film. And yeah, you guys, if Kino Lorber, I don't know if this is official or unofficial, but everything you guys are doing is on YouTube. Just um,
We try
in
to
one way.
contain it, but you know,
So there's got to be lots of different approaches to how we look at sound right now because it's going to be in different mediums, different platforms. Something might be on Netflix one year and then it's on Hulu or this or that. And of course, yeah, Brett, I mean, there's an incredible beauty to the different scores with Dr. Caligari. I haven't checked out the newest one, but I definitely would love to hear and check it out. There's so much, I mean, it's galactic amount of stuff happening.
yeah, yeah.
Lately, I've been watching a lot of Eisenstein. So his film scores go from again Prokofiev to Shostakovich, and my current stuff is a lot of Hans Zimmer. I don't know why he just seems to
Good.
be on a lot of my favorite films these days.
Are there any other films that you wanna completely remix, reconstruct the way you did with Rebirth of a Nation and just go, like, balls to the wall? You were saying, like, pairing heavy metal with, like, doing something completely experimental. Are there any films that you would want to work on in that way?
When you bring that up, my absolute favorite film of all time is Ghost in the Shell, and about Mamoru Oshii, this Japanese film director. And eerily enough, it's kind of got this classic ethereal score to it. Um, And if the funny thing is there's so many different versions of the film, um, that you have to imagine just like the way we look at the 90s, for example, Ghost in the Shell influenced everything. I mean, there's two films that are part of my favorite DNA. One is the Vangelis score for Blade Runner, which is an all-time favorite film of mine. Um, and there are scenes where you're flying over Los Angeles and there's like flames coming out of these weird towers, and they have huge projections of a Japanese woman with chopsticks eating noodles or something. And this Vangelis score is kind of you're floating in this kind, and that you realize that film was set in the year 2022, I think. We were supposed to be the future of that. And I was like, "Where's my spaceship?" I definitely. Um, and so there's got to be a beautiful way. Yeah, those two films I would want to rescore. Um, yeah, they're incredible and hyper influential. Blade Runner and Ghost in the Shell, 100%.
Well, as a multidisciplinary artist who's very interested in the visual side of music and sound, have you done much visual experimentation? Have you filmed much, or do you sort of focus primarily on audio?
Um, Usually I do art stuff like multimedia. Um, right now I'm gearing up for the Venice Biennial, which is a big deal in the arts and architecture. I'm doing a project where I'm taking the genetic signature of algae and turning the DNA from algae into music. That's a crazy art. You'll go into this weird room at the Venice Biennial, and there'll be a whole installation about that with these architects named Terraform. And Venice is interesting because the city is having a lot of problems with water, and it's sinking, and there's problems at every level because of climate change. As Brett has mentioned, I'm very interested in climate change, so I also will probably be going back to Antarctica and visiting the places where I went the first time. They're all melted, and that's a very short amount of time. So yeah, there's an environmental component to my work, and I'm also generally very pro the idea that we technology is not neutral. It has, the law of unintended consequences. So we who would have guessed that you would put a camera in your phone, a long time ago. That was shocking, and by I remember when Steve Jobs, the iPhone's only been out since what, 2011. So most people, when they think about the iPhone, um, they think of it as this current thing, but actually 2011 is really not that long ago. And if you were doing a film score, then they had microphones, cameras, everything is you could shoot a film on your iPhone at this point, or whatever kind of phone. And that changed. A lot of people are doing music videos, albums. There's a guy named Lil Nas X. Actually, if you're in New Orleans, you probably hear his music everywhere. But he made a bunch of his music videos using a phone. So it's going to get deeper and weirder because now it's the phone with AI and so on. So the production has gotten far more accessible, and that's a good thing. It really democratizes the whole situation.
I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on AI because I feel like AI is one day gonna score a whole film, one day gonna restore a film, it's coming for all of our jobs. What are your
Like,
thoughts
every
on?
now and then, you'll see something and you'll say, "Wow, how did someone make that?" And you'll find out it was AI, or you'll see that someone has, like, 8 fingers, and that you'll figure it out. But,
Mhm.
yeah, I agree. It's definitely something to keep an eye on, and that I hope that I'll have a chance to, you know, find a way to experiment with, and tap into its creative potential. Because who knows what its creative potential is? It's so brand new, and it's just in its infancy, really. So it's an
Mhm.
exciting time to be a creative, I think.
Yeah, AI is like talking about the wind at this point. I mean, it's really it's already highly involved with our daily life. Like if you're using Google Maps, or if you're calling your bank, or if your credit card gets swiped anywhere. So there's narrow AI, and then general AI. And the problem of our time is that we have a radical sense of people feeling disempowered with their relationship to technology, where they're scared or in fear of learning more. And I'm a big fan of continuous education. I do think that the economy is going to probably shift quite a bit, and there's a lot of economists studying how, if you have stuff like universal basic income, because AI will probably displace a huge amount of the population's engagement with repetitive tasks or things like that, but also the creative economy. There's a gentleman by the name of Richard Florida who wrote this book, The Rise of the Creative Class. Even that is going to be put under stress, and this is all going to happen very quickly within the next couple of years. Um, I do think that as someone who's pro technology, but also pro human, that we will have to always be prepared to think of technologies that disrupt. And as we learn, and humans, if there's one thing we're good at, we do learn. That's what the problem is what people haven't been put in a sense where they're in a continuous education, and they've been put in continuous consumption. So that means they're not really updating and figuring and learning. They're watching Fox News or voting for Trump or whatever. I don't know. Um, yeah. So here we are at the peak of human civilization, and we have some wild billionaires running around, oligarch style stuff, and people are just not feeling like they're stakeholders in the technology themselves. At least that's my philosophy. And you know,
Yeah,
that's
I think a lot of people fear it because they don't understand it. I think it is something that if you can make it work for you in whatever creative process you have and you own, then it could be very helpful. But it is a little frightening that it is growing exponentially and you don't know where it's headed and how conscious it can be. It's already pretty conscious, so
yeah. I mean, I
see.
celebrate controversy. I don't think that there's going to be a problem with. how computers are, kind of put through our world because they're already kind of there. The problem is how people adjust to their changing work environment. Um, and heartbreakingly, of course, we've been seeing with Doge and other stuff where people are just getting smashed by just random letters that are being sent out. They're actually feeding a lot of the government to AI right now. So I'm dead serious, by the way. Um, and so this is going to be, a shock to the system. And it's heartbreaking because people were not prepared and they were not thinking about smart use of AI. And I mean, just throwing everybody's social security numbers in AI, which is what's happening with Doge, by the way. I think that's going to cause a lot of problems. But every crisis is an opportunity for innovation, and hopefully we'll learn. Again, I'm a big fan of learning from mistakes, learning from crises. And
And technology advances at a quicker pace with every generation, and it just requires us to, continually educate ourselves and be like when the internet came out, people dove in and shared information without sort of realizing what it would grow into. And I think that's part of the adventure, and it's also part of the learning curve.
Mhm. And that's healthy. I mean, yeah, a
Yeah.
healthy society should encourage continuous learning and
Yeah.
innovation, and not to be just sitting around on the couch watching whatever Fox News or something.
Yep.
So yeah,
The
and
ability to like discern between something that is artificial or you know uh a conspiracy or a fake or whatever you want to call it becomes tougher and tougher. But hopefully that's going to make consumers of media smarter and smarter.
hopefully,
Always yet.
hopefully, one can always hope.
Well, Paul, speaking of, today's sort of socio-political climate, it is the 10-year anniversary of pioneers of African cinema, American cinema. How significant is it today? Like just where we are today in the world. Why should people know and care about this box set? Just going back to, pioneers of African American cinema.
Yeah, it's an incredible moment because 10 years of pioneers of African American cinema, you really can see it spread like a ripple through the scene because a lot of people, like Questlove from The Roots, for example, or other, older and younger directors realized that there were big gaps in their historical knowledge. And that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing because people then learn and continue to update and figure the history. I mean, it's one of my favorite filmmakers, Jordan Peele's film, Get Out, for example. It's an incredible film. There's lots of ways to think about the storytelling techniques that were pioneered by these folks, and then the way that it's come to influence a whole generation of filmmakers at every level. It just the issue for us right now is accessibility, and I think that the 10-year mark means streaming, and I haven't used a DVD in years and things like that, so I'm always looking at other mediums to
Oh,
think
don't
about
say that on this
accessibility.
show. Don't
Yeah.
look at their shelf
Oh, okay.
behind Alicia.
I guess that
Right.
answers my next question, which was Colette.
Well,
Sorry.
there's gotta be a clever hack. I mean, because, um, 10 years of film, you've seen a total pivot to streaming. And so that's gonna be kind of like film as like almost like a utility, like electricity or water or something where you can just turn it on and look at stuff. And YouTube and all the other platforms have really sort of absorbed all of the previous history of film, and it's been powerful to see that. Um, and I think that the box set still has a nice beauty to it because it really is all the films in one place. There's beautiful artwork, and the liner notes are incredible. All of which leads you to this notion of a collectible object, and that's an important statement right now because I think if anybody can just stream something on their phone, which is cool, the next step is, well, let me learn more about this and figure what's going on. And that's where I think having the box set and updating it and kind of continuously holding that curation together it's a really powerful statement.
Yeah, one thing I would add is that, yeah, at the time it came out, I would say probably half the films in the collection were not, you couldn't see them anywhere. And the other half you could maybe find on YouTube, but they would be in pretty poor quality. So it was important to get these, just get a brick of, history out so that people have these raw materials. And then, like Paul said, over the years, we will occasionally release more films, and we don't have to like feel like we're rewriting the history over again, but we're just, that history, there's more to learn. There are more filmmakers to discover. There are more performers to discover. Um, and Borderline's a great example of how Paul Robeson went from, that he was also working with these sort of avant-garde conceptual artists in Switzerland at the time, some of whom went on to become with like the Beats in the 1950s. And um, so, it's important to make the films available because, as we know with physical media, a lot of times a film may be available streaming, and then the next week when you go to look for it, it's not there anymore. And the only way to really know you're going to be able to watch it later is to own it as a physical object. But it's interesting is that the way um, film culture has kind of grown, where someone will discover something, whether it's just a clip or someone mentions it on a podcast, or they see it on their phone and then want to see it again, and it opens a door to, like, whether it's owning a copy of the disc or discovering other uh, work by this performer or director. It's, you know, I'm a big believer in the viewer sort of cultivating an organic uh, interest in film and just letting it follow wherever their interests guide them. And so it's my job to like get as many films out there so that people will, no matter what impulse or obscure notion they want to explore, they're going to be able to find, the films that provide that information and hopefully encourage them to either make films or view more films or, you know, experience their creativity.
Have you noticed the role of physical media playing a big role in people's interest in silent films? Can you talk a little bit about how physical media has sort of influenced your work as a restoration specialist and silent film in general?
In terms of
Like
like streaming?
discoverability, and has, physical media been a champion of silent film in a way that streaming hasn't perhaps? Or, like, why restore for physical media versus theatrical release, for example?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it to me is that there are still plenty of films out there that are still not available. We are just finishing a big collection of films in collaboration with the Library of Congress that feature dogs. So some of them are like Rin Tin Tin type action dogs, some are comedy dogs. And it started as just like a cute idea, but the deeper we got into it, the more we realized that these films are not out there, and maybe they aren't going to change the world, but it connects us and shows us that in the 1890s, and yes, we have a dog film from like 1896 of dogs just on the surf in the beach, or a baby surrounded by puppies. It's what's in our phones now, and people who were doing this 130 years ago. So it kind of like connects us to, it makes us realize that it's all a continuum of culture, and we're still going to think puppies are cute. Um, and, sometimes it's fun to do a frivolous project that just fills in the gaps of the cinematic record.
Didn't I mean, Brett didn't in terms of restoring films, a lot of early film was shorts, like short, literally, and we're now seeing like something like TikTok where people are making crazy short videos. That actually goes back to the origins of film because you'd play like a nickel, you'd go and see some like little short thing. And it's eerie because of the way that the circle of culture is always kind of dimensionalizing and repeating. And like if you start to think even like what Brett was just saying, um, everyone is fascinated with people now leave videos on at night. It's called ASMR, where they just listen to something in the background while they're sleeping, but it's like a YouTube channel. And it's been really wild to see the last couple of years as all of these different parts of video culture are still circling back to some of the earlier sensibilities. Um, and like, the magic of film is an incredible, uh, important way just to kind of really give us a sense of dimensionality right now. Um, it's wild because if you think about TikTok and then say, "Oh, that's exactly like 1897."
Yeah. And,
Most people would
these
not catch that.
Yeah.
short films, and for the longest, you look back at them and think, "Oh, well, these are primitive. There's no story, there's no plot." And they eventually grew into what movies are supposed to be. Well, it kind of came full circle, and we sort of see that this little nugget of how it began with just the visual pleasure of looking at something that makes you happy is kind of the essence of cinema. So it doesn't have to be an hour and a half long, and it can only be 30 seconds, as a lot of these short films are. So, any kind of, like, I love just having little realizations about our film today and that it connects somehow to film. This is restoration geeking out, how it, connects to films of 100 years ago. I love it when those moments happen and we realize that I'm not just an antiques dealer, that it's still relevant, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're almost out of time, but do you guys have any other projects or announcements that you'd like to make or anything else you'd like to talk about before we wrap?
I'll
Brett,
go
you wanna go
first. You
first?
can't make an announcement, but Paul and I are confident that we're going to be able to work on this Eisenstein project, which will, for the moment, remain nameless. But I'm very excited about it, and who knows what lies beyond that. So I will hand the microphone back to Paul.
Yeah. I'm in the middle of finishing a couple of 2 books and a couple other film scores as well, and I'm gonna be artist in residence. We're in negotiations with Harvard at the moment. So, as a matter of fact, Brett, I'll circle back on that because, I'd love to do a mini festival of the films at Harvard, later, this year, early next year. And for those who see this from years from now, who knows? But, it's all gonna be online, so either way, um, that's the first couple of announcements, and what a pleasure it is to interact with Kino Lorber, and I love the fact that you guys have such a deep respect for history of film and for thinking about the long, arc of history in cinema, so, it's a pleasure to work with you guys.
Well,
The
thank
the
you
feeling
guys
is
so much.
mutual.
Thank you,
It's
Paul.
always
Thank you,
been
Brett,
a
for
great
being with us
association, and I
today. That
hope that
was
we can
wonderful
continue.
conversation. Yeah, and anyone who's watching, if you're interested in the silent films that we discussed today, you can find them along with thousands of others at kinolorber.com or klstudioclassics.com. Both of those links are in the description below. And while you're there, please sign up for our newsletter. And if you haven't already, be sure to follow us on social. Thank you so much, everyone. Be sure to check back next month for episode 11, and we'll see you next time.